Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be starting a two-part session on really the end of Christ's life, what we would call the Paschal Mystery, which means Christ's passion, death, resurrection, and ascension. So those are a lot of big, heavy words, I know. We're going to start with just that first one, this term, Paschal Mystery. Breaking it down, this first part, the word Paschal, means, it's an adjective saying relating to Passover. And in the Old Testament, Passover was essentially referring to the story of Moses and the Israelites being delivered out of Egypt. And specifically, if you know the story of the 10 plagues, with the 10th plague, the angel of death comes through and takes the firstborn son of every child in Egypt. But the way that the Israelites, the Hebrews, are saved is that essentially they sacrifice a lamb, they put the blood over their doorway, and this is a sign for the angel to pass over their home. And then the second part of this phrase is the word mystery. Now, normally when we think of mystery in like the modern sense, it's like a game of Clue, where like it's something for us to figure out. It's something that we can understand, and it just takes a little brain work to figure out what is going on here. But in our Catholic Christian sense, when we use the term mystery, really it means something that we can never fully understand, something that is impossible to comprehend in its totality. I like to use the math example of like a four-dimensional shape. So we as mathematicians, as people, can understand the kind of maybe the idea of a four-dimensional shape. We can say certain things, we can make certain true statements about them, but it's never something that we will be able to understand. It's not something you in your mind can just picture and it exists and it is. A four-dimensional shape will always be a mystery to us in the same way that something like this in our Catholic sense is a mystery. And so when we use the term Paschal Mystery, as Catholics we kind of understand it as this mystery that we will never understand completely of how Christ kind of was the lamb at Passover that was sacrificed for us, that redeemed us. Or another way to put it is that Christ, through his passion, his suffering, his death on the cross, and his resurrection, and then later his ascension into heaven, has redeemed us through his sacrifice. The Paschal Mystery is the mystery that Christ makes us new, that Christ gives us hope, that Christ has saved us. And one thing that's really interesting about the Paschal Mystery is its presence in all four Gospels. So if you don't know, in the Bible there are four different Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And what gospel means, or what gospel means in this sense, is really that these are the four books that are about Jesus himself. These are the books that tell the story of Jesus's life from birth to ascension at the end. But what's really interesting is if you are kind of a scripture scholar, one thing that we do is we look at these four books compared to each other. We do what's called a synopsis of the Gospels. So basically, if you take each of the Gospels and kind of write out which stories are in which Gospels, when do they happen, is there any difference? A lot of the Gospels change based on the book you're in. So a lot of the stories of Jesus' birth are only present in one Gospel. The story of the shepherds in the fields with the angel who comes to them and says, Christ is born, that's only present in the Gospel of Luke. Or in the Gospel of John, it really doesn't start with Jesus' birth at all. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And we understand the Word in that sense to refer to Christ. Essentially, each of these four Gospels has different stories in it, has different really things that the author wanted to emphasize, different teachings that the author wanted to bring out. But one thing that is present in all four Gospels is the Paschal Mystery. So is Jesus' Last Supper, that he was betrayed in the garden, that he went through the Passion, so he was kind of beaten, he had to carry the cross, that he was crucified, that he died, that he rose, and that after some time with his apostles, after rising, he ascended into heaven. And there are two reasons why this matters. First is that really this means that these events are the maybe the most historical that we find in the Bible. So not to say that any story didn't happen or it's not true, but when we look at the Gospels in comparison with each other, the way we usually understand the real, factual, historical thing that happened is if they are present in multiple Gospels in the same way. So with that understanding, we say that the Paschal Mystery is the most historical event that happens in the Gospels that we know pretty much for sure. Jesus lived, that he suffered, that he was crucified, that he died, and that he rose again. But the other way to look at it is that really these are the most important events in the whole Bible. That everything from the Old Testament up to the Gospels really was leading into the Paschal Mystery, and that everything after the Gospels, with Acts of the Apostles, with the letters of St. Paul, with the book of Revelations, everything there is kind of flowing out of the Paschal Mystery. And really, Christ's death and resurrection is the central thing that our faith is about. So to break things up a bit, today we're only going to be focusing on those first two parts, so Christ's passion and death. And fair warning, before we jump into this is kind of a heavier topic than we've been addressing in the past. We don't want to kind of downplay the real pain and suffering that Christ went through in his passion and in his death. We don't want to just ignore it and pretend it didn't happen, because these things are so important for our faith. So just be aware as we're moving through this, it's a little bit of a heavier topic. So just a broad summary of what happened. Jesus has the Last Supper. After that, he goes to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's a whole thing. But essentially at that point, Judas, one of his apostles, betrays him. He hands him over to the Roman guards. The Roman guards kind of march him off to Pontius Pilate, who is the kind of the Roman governor who's in charge of the area where the Jews lived. And essentially Pilate asks, what crime has this man done? And the Jews, the people who turned Christ over, say he has committed heresy against our word, that he needs to be put to death. And so Pilate sentences Christ to death on the cross. After that, Christ is kind of beaten, whipped. They put on the crown of thorns. They make him carry his cross to the place where he's going to die. They nail him to that cross. They raise it up, and then he dies there on that hill. And so this obviously raises a question for us. We've been saying, we have talked about, I'm sure you know from even not from this year, but from past years, we say that Jesus is God, that Jesus worked miracles, that he could do all of these things. So I guess the question is, if Jesus is this all-powerful, perfect being, if Jesus can do all of these miracles, why does he let this happen? We know that this isn't something that just happened to Christ. It's not something where he didn't have a say in the matter. Instead, this is something that he is willingly choosing. The cross is something that he approaches, that he willingly takes up for us. And in the Gospel of John, actually, one of the phrases that Jesus said explains this perfectly. Christ says, "There is no greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And so we know that Christ offers himself up for us, that Christ chooses to become the lamb sacrificed for us, to use that sense of Passover, the lamb that by its sacrifice really protected those Israelites from death. And through his death, Jesus is beginning the work of redeeming this fallen world that we've talked about in the past. So we've discussed how the way that we understand original sin, kind of the brokenness of the world, is that we just want to acknowledge that each of us are imperfect, that we will fail, that we will make mistakes, and that the world as a whole is imperfect, that there is evil in the world. But through this sacrifice, Christ is showing us a better way to be, a way to live selflessly, to care about the other, to kind of not focus so much on ourselves and the things we want and the way we want things to be, but to care about other people besides ourselves. And so obviously in the modern world especially, we're not as likely to need to lay down our lives for our friends, but the meaning is still the same, that we need to be better, that we need to reject kind of our fallen brokenness, and that we have this example of Christ as someone who loved wholeheartedly, who gave his entire life for the people he loved, and who continues to love us now. Obviously, we know that's not the end of the story. We know there's this resurrection. We know there's an ascension. But for now, just know that Christ loves us no matter the cost.